this is part two. I'm sorry, we had an interruption. Something happened. Somebody came and something button was pushed and it interrupted. And this was it was what normally I would hit the pause button. Something hit the stop button, and then we had a problem and we couldn't record. And so I'm recording now. So there's gonna be two videos today because of the snafu of this. I was talking about specific bargain in that sense, about the book I was reading in that sense of this, and that's why this today's second part of the video, continuing it. The other book two books I've been reading about basically statesmen, about the question of my interest in statesmanship and thinking of maybe teaching courses on statesmanship and leadership. Two new books came out recently. One by this one is by Robert Jervis. It's by Princeton. It's not that how recent it is. I think it's 2014 or 2000. Well, I only discovered 2017. It's in paperback now. It's available. Someone told me about it. I didn't know about it, because I don't always get told. This is basically the psychology. In other words, how statesmen think, the psychology of international relations by Robert Jervis. And this is basically a book about the question of looking at psychology and looking at the way state actors thinks. The political part one is about political psychologies, how does setting beliefs and the problems, the mechanisms doing this. Then the question of heuristics and biases. That part two in that sense. Three, political psychology and international relations, and then four, psychology and international security, being the structure of the book. And it's basically looking at the question of statesmen in terms of psychology. And it's a very good book. Now, I have always said that, my statesmen, the books I've always required, I say biography is always one of the best things about studying statesmen. And hence, this is why Plutarch's Lives was always a great guide to understand, a kind of guide to learn statecraft, statesmanship, actors, how actors think and how actors and role models. In other words, Machiavelli says we can learn by two things: by doing and by learning by role models. That's why one of the best instruments of learning how to be a good ruler, a good leader in that sense, is look at examples. And read biographies. Studying statecraft, studying political leadership, you read the biographies of people. Take critical biographies and read the characters. Now, what's so great about Plutarch would have been always, I said, the problem is the translation. We can't get the Dryden only edition. That's one volume, the complete Plutarch's Lives. The Dryden edition by Modern Library. It's Dryden still. It's modernized Dryden, but still Dryden in it's Elizabethan, post-Elizabethan Stuart English, so therefore slightly modernized, but still very difficult. And students complain about it when you try teaching it. I wish somebody would do to Plutarch a complete Plutarch translation, a decent translation of it. Okay, there are decent translations of individual lives or individual comparison lives, but not the whole. And to get the value of Plutarch for studying leadership, it's the whole. Because what does Plutarch's Lives, the Greek and Roman Lives, is twofold. It gives you, and Plutarch basically uses Aristotle's virtues, the criteria of the virtues and vices, and the whole networks, and looks at the person's character, and each of these these politicians that he focuses on lives is and he compares one in Rome and one in Greece. So therefore, you see the cultural difference between Greece and Rome of a certain type of person who shares relatively the same virtues and vices in this regard. The virtues and vices, the specific characters and the specific qualities, what virtues they possess and what vices they possess, and how do they react in different situations, and how did this lead them to make the decisions that they made. Plutarch's Lives, and that's why people like Truman and a lot of people who read, Truman loved Plutarch's Lives. He said it was a guide, and I think this is one of those. Studying Plutarch's Lives is one of those great things. It's a shame that there's no modern equivalent of it. There's been a couple of modern. Someone tried to do political leaders or the modern Plutarch by that, which it's so. It's not. It doesn't really do it. My teacher, teacher and mentor Mel Bradford, did something for the founding fathers of the Constitution a little bit, not complete, but not all of them, but a kind of modern Plutarch in his book, The Worthy Company, which was after his death, it was republished as Founding Fathers by Kansas, which was like lives of the founders, short lives of the founders. For that, there was kind of Plutarchian character to it, and that was very interesting for that. If those who want to study the understanding the framers, this is a very good. These were very good short little guides to do that. Now, this is mostly about the question of how statesmen think in terms of modern psychology, from the place of understanding this. And this is basically, remember, we have to always understand IR theory looks at systemic IR. But remember, the IR theory just looks at the aggregated actors of this and the system of state to state. But the problem with this is, as Jack Snyder says, it's a two-dimensional aspect. Jack Snyder's work on this is actually pretty good in that sense. That there is this idea that this is why realism and neorealism and neoliberalism both have of error, and that it often fails to address the internal political questions that shape state actors. So there's not only actions between states, but actions within states, and that the effects of the external effects can impact the internal, and the internal can impact the external, particularly aspects of interests and other things. So therefore, this is a very growing dynamic in that sense, and therefore the question is the systemic operates within the subsystemic, which is by subsystemic I means the individual actors, and particularly the individual decision makers themselves and how they do it. And this is, again, this book deals with the psychology of trying to understand the way decision makers think in that sense, of that light, in light of that. And it's a very useful guide in that sense. And the other book is another book. This is a book by a new John Mersheimer book. Again, this is Yale University Press. It's published, I think it's like this year, in fact, brand new, spanking new. John Mersheimer and Sebastian Rostow. Rostow is professor of political science at Notre Dame. Mersheimer is the University of Chicago, so I think he's still distinguished professor at this. This book is basically his argument of how states think and the rationality of foreign policy. And again, this is a very much, the rational actor assumption, the strange relations between uncertainty, chapter 3, defining strategic rationality, contending definitions, chapter 5, contending definitions, chapter 4, chapter 5, rationality and grand strategy, chapter 6, rationality and crisis management, and then 7, non-rational state behavior, chapter 8, global goal rationality, and chapter 9, rationality in international politics. This is the whole aspect of the book. And again, the problem here is what I would argue. This is a very important book. This is going to be a neo-realist at defending how states, but at the same time, well, states are to what degree do states think? States are not living bodies. They're social bodies who are constructed by individual actors and parties and group dynamics. So therefore, the question then becomes, well, maybe statesmen. This is why I was contrasting this to this, because this is attributing to state bodies the reality of, and this is my problem with neoliberalism, both neoliberalism and neoliberalism, is their reductionism to treating anthropomorphizing an aggregate structure and treating it, being able to say, well, it behaves a certain way, when it's not that, but rather the people and the actors who are doing that. Therefore, that's what the book I have the book over here hiding someplace. Um, uh, um, Gustav Le Bon's classic book, The Crowd, right? The question of psychology, the question of how does people in mass constitute decision making and thinking about things and reacting to things and their behavior, right? And this is the way the individual actors do it, the mass and this. Then this is what this does is kind of like, okay, let's aggregate all that. Let's treat it as the state itself. And then, well, now this is valuable now, because the question is, the whole issue of all science is, does it work or not? right? Does it produce? This is positivist political science. I mean, this is why both realism and neoliberal, both realism and liberalism, neoliberalism, neorealism are all positivistic in its construction of rationality in that sense. The difference in one say we can say the divide the realist versus the liberal is that the liberal believes that there's win-win possibilities. There's, in other words, an infinite. It's in it using the language of game theory. It's an infinite game. It's an infinite game of with multiple possible win-win outcomes. Whereas uh, realism, both neo and that are the argument is it's a finite or limited game. It's a limited game where there's going to be winners and losers, zero sum game thinking. So therefore, the two different types of games are applied. Where finite games versus infinite games. Well, the argument is well, some neorealism is a kind of infinite game too, but it's still zero sum thinking, where there's going to be winners and losers. And this is why that book by Simon Sinek about the infinite games is interesting in that sense because he looks at this from the business point of view. And I think he's right about this, and that's he takes game theory and applies it to the business world, and thinking that we should maybe not understand business as a kind of a zero sum game of winning and losing, like sports, like this of the sports metaphor of a game, that it's a finite entity, this conflict or this thing is a finite thing, but rather it's not a finite that this leads to that leads to that came out of this came out of that came out of that, and that it's life, it's continuing in that sense, so it's infinite and that yes, but life itself is far. Our individual lives and things, organic entities, are finite. Yes, but then time isn't in that sense, or maybe it is, maybe. But this is what I think we should understand about this debate, and the complexity of the question of this theme. In our international students of international relations have to understand that this is kind of a nice tool that the positivist science is kind of it's really the question: does the answers do they kind of work or not? That's always been the question of science and practical science. And that's something which we look at from the point of view of like Thomas Kuhn's famous book about the revolutions of scientific structures. The question is, does the science work or not? If it does, then it will work. But when it no longer explains and it doesn't adequately explain to people, and people does it, and the explanations are not satisfying, and then what happens is people cease to believe in it, and that's when the paradigms break down, right? In Kuhn, I think this is an aspect of this that therefore. And that's the problem that simple solution, simple reduction, the kind of positivistic science it works, but it offers answers, but they're not always satisfying. Realism can't really predict; it's not predictive in that sense. Both liberalism and realism can explain something, why something occurred, but really hasn't really that strong a predictive ability. It can't always ensure that, and that it has some level of predictability, but not completely accurate. It's almost that the argument of the realists did not foresee that many of the neo-realists and realists did not foresee the end of the Cold War. So they didn't foresee it. This is why it led to the neo-realist idea of the decline of great powers, the Mersheimer's creed, that all of a sudden neo-realism had to deal with the collapse. So why do power systems collapse, and why do state systems collapse in that sense? Or the other argument is, well, how does hegemony arise? And is hegemony universal in that sense? So that liberalism, that neoliberal theory at one level can lead to a hegemonic argument, but it could also lead to a multilateralist argument, right? The two different directions in here. And that the same thing with the question of the balance of power theory. Does balance of power always lead to a bipolar model or hegemonic, or to avoid hegemonic, do you create balance of power structures? Is always balance of power productive, positive, or could a balance of power model actually perpetuate an unjust status quo too? So again, this is all of the IR in this positivist understanding is still working within an aggregated frame. And that therefore, if we want a deeper understanding, we have to go to the subsystemic understanding. Again, that's very interesting. Now, one of the great thinkers, Eliot Cohen. Eliot Cohen, his work, Eliot Cohen, who I really respected. When I do leadership courses, one of the books I always use was his Eliot Cohen's Grand Strategy, Supreme Commander. It's a book about the various military leaders and the way they made decisions in order during war, conflict, World War II, First World War, and over time, these military leaders and these statesmen, statecrafters, who made decisions and organized alliances in this, and how they developed leadership. And it's a very powerful book on the application of leadership in warfare and grand command. He was he's dean at this, and he wrote. And this is the book. Um, he wrote this in 2018, and actually, this was a necessary book, The Big Stick, the limits of soft power and the necessity of military force, kind of contraring. Remember, after year 2000, 1990s, all through the 1990s, and the rise of the neoliberal consensus led, and particularly with remember the role of what's his name? Come on, I can't find his book. It's Joseph Nye and Joseph Nye's discovery of soft power. Soft power became a major thing. I've had a video about it in the past. I've talked about it in the past. And that all of a sudden all IR became kind of soft power. Europe became seen itself all soft power, and that there's been a confusion about what soft power really means, and that in fact often what people call soft power, when I talk about European or Chinese soft power, they often mean economics, but economics is not a soft power. And as even Joseph Nye notes in his Power to Lead, that hard power consists of carrots and sticks. In other words, carrots, any kind of incentive is a hard power. Incentives and punishments, threats are hard power. They're not soft power. Soft power is attractiveness, it's charisma, it's likability, or that people do things because they like you. Love in that sense. Love, attraction, care. People are attracted to you. People, they're attracted to you because you're famous, or they like what you do, or you stand for. And what they end up doing, then therefore they will often do for you, do what you want them to do. This is the role that charismatic leaders. This is something Weber talks about, the charismatic leader, in that sense, and that the role of charisma in politics is kind of this aspect. And what Manai does in soft power is routinize the concept. Now, what Cohen in his book here, Big Stick, says, no, you can't. Soft power does not happen without hard power. In other words, that mere soft power is not possible without hard power in that fundamental sense. And therefore, you need the hard power in order to actualize soft power in that sense. But the reason why I'm bringing up Cohen is because his new book, just brand new, it's published by who's it published by? Basic Books, in fact. Yes, brand new book published just now. I think it's 2013. What is it, right? 2023. I mean. Yeah, it just published 2023. Um, it's the Headset Book Group. Range, it's. I don't know what the cover will look in the U.S. So this is the cover that they is printed in the United States edition. So this is probably the U.S. This is the Howard Crown. It's called. Now I'm using this famous title from Richard II. Right, Howard Crown, Shakespeare on how leaders rise, rule, and fall. This is an outstanding book. If I said Plutarch was great for studying leadership, Shakespeare as well is a good guide for leadership in a sense. And people say, well, that's the but how the court. That's two types, and this is something that even Joseph Nye in his Powers to Lead talks about leaders having two aspects. There's in other words, there's the inner court, the circle of people that he needs to use in order to impact this larger people, and then there's there's two types of audiences. There's the inner circle, and then the larger circle. Therefore, the nation, the people, the voters, and things like this. That therefore there's two dimensions of this, that there's someone who actualizes and reaches and communicates with. In fact, therefore, rhetoric itself is both hard power and soft power. Rhetoric itself, the character of rhetoric itself, engages in both these things, both the aspects of hard power and also charisma, soft power, to get people to do what you want them to do. So therefore, there is this whole network of this local circle, the people who the courtiers, right? The whole understanding of the court, and that we and, that, and therefore there's two levels of politics. There's the court level, which the aspects of this, the court, the king getting that to the king or the political leader getting these people to operationalize or help him achieve, or to he has to navigate them in that circle, to use them to get it what he wants. And then the other problem is the larger society, the larger people, the larger. And Shakespeare gives us all three dimensions in his plays. And not, I mean, and in fact, this is what Eliot. Now Eliot does a great job here. And like he said, and I'll read the line. He says, um, "It's all very well to see Richard III, Granel, and Iago on the stage. However, I had to work with some of those. I had to work with some of those people. I'm a military historian, a former diplomat, a dean, and an engaged participant in Washington policy circles for over 3 decades. I have closely observed and occasionally worked with presidents, senators, foreign ministers, counselors, spies, and generals at home and abroad, not to mention corporate executives, provosts, and university presidents. I have even exercised power myself from time to time. Even through it all, I have come to recognize that there are few guides more perceptive than Shakespeare, who can illuminate how our understanding of how people get, use, and lose power. So, get how people get, use, and lose power. Shakespeare taught me to read speeches with a discerning eye, to scrutinize how politicians dress and stage public events, and alas, to understand even more deeply the darker sides of the desire to rule. So, not there's in other words, there's different reasons why people want to rule. To rule, there's both beneficial, benevolent, but also darker sides. Again, we have to remember what Jordan Peterson talks about the personalities, right? The dark triad, that sociopath. If you look at leadership often has the so-called dark psychopathy. Was it psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and what do you call it? The other one, the one that they always accuse, narcissism, right? The so-called dark triad. The dark triad of those three things of personalities that all leaders tend to exercise aspects of narcissism, sociopathy, and Machiavellianism. In that sense, that term Machiavellianism is obviously cunning or deception or whatever. Um, Desire to rule. He even nudged me to anticipating a major war, right? Because he said that he was, he says, during the idea of turning to these thoughts into a book occurred to me after seeing the production of Henry VIII at the Fogger Theater in Washington, D.C. Henry VIII is not a particularly popular play. And indeed, for many years, some thought it might not be a legitimate part of Shakespeare's canon. The present scholarly consensus seems to be that it represents a collaboration with a fellow playwright, John Fisher. Be that as it may, there is a passage in it that is all Shakespearean. Cardinal Wolsey, Henry VIII's proud, sanctious, sageous, and imperious, empress, Paris chancellor, had been abruptly dismissed by his mercurial and, in many ways, very opaque master. The shaken chief minister says to his understudy Thomas Cromwell, "Farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness. This is the state of man. Today he puts forth the tender leaves of hope. Tomorrow blossoms and bears his blushing honors thick upon him. The third day comes from frost, killing frost. Then, when he thinks, good, easy man, full surety, his greatness is a ripening, nips his roots, and then he falls, as I do. I have ventured like little wanton boys that swim on bladders. This many summers in a sea of glory. But far beneath my depth, my high blown pride at length broke under me, and now has left me, weary and old with service, to the mercy of a rude steam that must forever hide me. Hearing the passage occasioned a shock of recognition. Plenty of eminent persons in Washington have taken the boyish pleasures of swimming upon the sea of glory, but are indeed far beyond their depth. I have seen some thrash like Wolseley when their floats have burst. I even watched the few drowned in the torrent. After the performance, I had scheduled to get together with some of my students. As graduate students at one of the country's leading schools of international affairs, they hoped to discuss Washington politics. Of course, and registered some surprise when I suggested that we talk about Wolseley's speech instead. After a lively hour, we agreed that we would explore further what Shakespeare had to teach us about power. So began a series of meetings to discuss another Shakespearean speech, other Shakespearean speeches, many of which feature in the later chapters. A prod from President Don Daniels of Johns Hopkins led a short course for alumni, and then to a longer one on Shakespeare for policymakers, offered to graduate students and even freshmen at Hopkins. This book is the eventual result. So this is basically the book of what he did, and it's wonderful. I mean, his structure is very clear in that sense. It's the first part is about the introduction, and it says the Arc of Power, which is the introduction. I was reading the first part of the introduction of it, right? Then chapter one, why Shakespeare? Why should we look at Shakespeare? That's the introduction. Why should we look at Shakespeare? Why is Shakespeare worth looking at? And it's very. I'm a student of Shakespeare, Shakespeare's politics. I studied with my Leopold de Alvarez. Um, um, I even participated in many conferences on Shakespeare and politics. Some of them I discussed with even Alan Bloom when Bloom came to University of Dallas during his tour of his best-selling book at the time. I participated in some courses on this, and I attended conferences on this. So I knew people who worked on Shakespeare, and I did a discussion group on Shakespeare's English politics plays, basically almost a year long, going over from not only the so-called the Henriade, the classic history, but also King John and then Henry VIII. So I discussed in discussion group with people of Henry VIII, and you can see how the that ended our study that we did. Now the structure here is divided in three parts: what acquiring power, the exercising power, and the losing power. So the acquiring power is three ways to do it. Chapter one, inheriting it; two, acquiring it; and three, seizing it. Right, and he gives you the plays and go through. It's wonderful. And then part two, exercising power, inspiration, manipulation, and murder. Okay, that's the three. Chapter five is inspiration. Charismatic. This idea. In fact, this is something. If you read if you read this book with Joseph Nye's book, The Power to Lead, it might be a good comparison in that sense, where he talks about the different aspects of leadership and the different levels of this and the way the tools you need to do it. I think this is a good aspect of it. Um, and then I would also read something like Con's Lords and Wadden Prince, with that as well. Those three together with this with the power to lead by nigh and yeah, the Modern Prince would by Constant Lord, even the Yale edition, the first edition. The second edition really doesn't add any much. I mean, I understand why he did it. He wanted a second edition. He wanted to say something about Trump, and I think he wanted to make more money than. I think he wanted to make a little more money that Yale would give him, and that's why he did an encounter. So encounter would be it's the encounter would give him more profit. That's it's a 40% deal, right? If you go to an account, this is not an academic publisher. Academic publishers pay you very little, unless even as a bestseller, you might get a 10% value of the book, whereas a normal publisher might give you maybe 20, 30. So that's why I understand why Con's Lord went to the second edition. I was disappointed in the second edition of Con's Lord's Modern Prince because it really didn't add much to it. And the last part is Losing Power, 4 chapters. Chapter 8, Innocence and Arrogance. Chapter 9, Magic and Self-Deception. Chapter 10, Walking Away from It. And then Afterward, which is Shakespeare's political vision in that sense. This has been my reading. In fact, I'm not really finished with this. To be honest with you, I think I got to seizing it in chapter 4, and it's been wonderful. So I mean, I'd strongly recommend it to anyone in that sense. Well, that's this meeting. It's recorded early and be released slightly after the other one. So okay, you should be seeing your thing today. I just repeat again, if you liked everything, like it, but like some both things. Um, Remember that the next week's thing will be finishing up Bow for So, and the next coming week we'll finish Bow for So up, and um, uh, two Rousseau up. So therefore there'll be Monday, Wednesday, the finishing last 2 videos in Rousseau, and then Thursday, Friday will be starting chapter 4 of Schmidt's dictatorship. Then the following week after that, there'll be 4 Monday through Friday, all Schmidt. I will, at the start of it, I will finish the third part of chapter 4, and I think that maybe even be and then start chapter 5. And that I think that the whole point of it is, I think chapter 5 will start with. No, am I right? Let's make sure I'm not talking out my behind. Yeah, chapter 6. Thursday will be the first part. Chapter 6 is actually divided into 5 parts. I needed to, and it's probably longish too because chapter 6, the state of siege. So the end of this will be the vote. The French Revolution. The 2 parts. It'll be three into three. 2 parts, 3 parts. On the question of the Volks Commissioner and the French Revolution. Which will be the discussion in that. Um, it's always tough when you do this, but yeah, chapter 4. No, chapter 4. Next week will be chapter 4, part 1 and part 2, and then chapter 5 will be is broken up into uh, part 1, yeah, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. 4th, 5th, 6th, and part 3. So starting on the 30th will be the part 4, and then the 4th will be. So next week will end part 4, and then part 5 will be on the not next week, but the following Monday. Monday would be 1 to 4, and then the first part of part 5 on December 7th. But then on the following week, which I haven't recorded those yet, we'll be finishing up part 6, the last 4 parts of part 6. So that's it. If you like it, like it, like it. Hit the like button. Share it with friends. Share it to everyone. Share both. Go. Remember, there's a two-part video today because of my fuck up. Okay. If you liked it, put your questions and comments or themes that you want to address to me to address. And please put them below, and I will get to them when I get to them. I hope you're okay. Take care, and you want to follow me on social media. The links are below. You want to follow my academic social media. The links are below too. If you want to help me subscribe, start on Patreon. That's available there. Um, I really don't know. I'm very uh, uh, I'm tired in that sense, really, honestly. Um, I hope to do some work. We'll see what happens. I'm going to be busy, like I said. So take care and bye bye. Again, share it, like it, like it. If you have any comments, please put the comments in either video about these things. And the next thing you can do is you can also put themes that you want me to address in future Fridays things. Okay, take care. Have a good weekend. So long. Bye bye. See you next time.